Hi, welcome to Living Clinic. This is Brandy Schantz, and today I'm here with Dr. Kirk Adams. He's currently the managing director of Innovative Impact LLC. He is here to talk disability and how he helps companies to really drive up their bottom line by hiring diversity. So, welcome, Kirk.
Thank you, Brandy. It's great to be here with you.
So I'm really excited to have you on because you and I have some very similar goals while often, just kind of looking at it from different perspectives. And you also do consulting work where you work with companies to help them to better hire disability, put them in the correct roles, how to, push up their bottom line
Yep,
by hiring disabled people. So tell me a little bit about that and how you do that.
sure. Well, it's really working to meet dual needs. So employers say they are having challenges competing for talent in the workplace, finding the right people to fit the roles they need to move their organizations forward. And at the same time, only 35% of us with significant disabilities are in the workforce. And that's about half the percentage of the general population. So of working age adults in the United States, about 70% roughly are working. And us with disabilities, only about 35%. So the conversation is really about this untapped pool of individuals who are very eager to have employment opportunities. And beyond that, the fact that living with disabilities allows us to develop strengths in the areas employers are looking for. So if you read a book like The Talent Code about how human beings develop strengths, it's really by overcoming challenges.
Mhm.
And sometimes people set those challenges or put themselves in systems to create challenges. If you're going to become a grand chess master, you're going to start out with the basic understanding of the game and face increasingly challenging competitors. If you're going to be a musician, you're going to start with scales. You're going to learn beginning pieces of music. You're going to tackle increasingly complex pieces of music, etc. So us with disabilities, through no choice of our own, are put in a situation where we're faced with lots of challenges. And as we grow older, as we move into those life transitions, education, employment, the challenges become more and more complex, and they're daily. So we have the opportunity, and we do develop really unique strengths in areas that employers want, like resilience and perseverance and self-motivation and creative problem solving, the ability to work with diverse teams, communication skills. So really, I just have those conversations with employers who are wanting to create the best organizations they can create by attracting and retaining the most talented people they can. And then I help them understand that there are systems in our country that are designed and funded to help them employ people with disabilities. So I connect them with those resources.
It's so amazing to me as somebody who became disabled later in life that, there hasn't been more of this done previously. I always thought that I was, very nimble and ready for change and resilient and all those things. And after I went through everything that's happened to me, I realized that I could never have had this kind of a superpower, I like to call it, prior to becoming disabled, because now I wake up each and every morning and I have no idea what the day's going to offer. None. There's no guarantees. I just have to be ready to move and shake and roll with whatever comes. And, you hear HR departments and the C-suite and managers, they're always asking, where do we find people like this? And I like to say, they're right in front of you. Look to your disabled community. We're ready for change at any moment.
That's right.
Any
And
moment.
that's the world of work these days.
Yeah.
You hear all the time, change is accelerating. Things are changing so fast, it's hard to keep up. Well, people with disabilities are trained to keep up.
And there's no, people ask me, how do you know if you've become resilient? And I always say, well, look at me. I'm alive. I'm still here. I haven't given up. Every day I have the option to give up and just say, no more. I can't try anymore. And I still haven't made it there. So, what a great group of potential employees to hire.
Yeah, and companies who've done it have amazing results.
Yeah.
And it's beyond just having good people doing good jobs. It's really can transform a corporate culture.
Mm-hmm.
And one prime example that I've had the privilege of visiting is in Anderson, South Carolina. Walgreens has one of their largest warehouse and distribution centers, and it was designed back in 2007 to be inclusive of people with disabilities. The head of Walgreens supply chain at that time, Randy Lewis, has an autistic son, and he was tasked with from the ground up, from raw land up, building a warehouse and distribution center for that part of the country. And he got buy-in from Walgreens leadership to create it intentionally to be inclusive of people with disabilities. So they got about 550 employees, and 40% are people with significant disabilities, primarily developmental disabilities. And they established the partnerships that I say, in order for us to do anything truly transformational, we have to align all the sectors: the government, the corporate, the nonprofit, and the community. And they did that from the beginning. They partnered with the state of South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. Every state has them. They're funded by the Department of Education. So they partnered with them and local nonprofits serving people with disabilities, and they brought in families with kids, young people with developmental disabilities, and brought them in. And they have their most productive distribution center out of their 20. The lowest turnover, the lowest absenteeism, the best employee satisfaction, the best productivity, the best safety record. And they also did a really smart thing. They partnered with a small university called Anderson University there from the beginning. And a friend now, Dr. Jeffrey Moore, and through the last 17, 18 years, through a succession of his PhD students, they have collected the data on the outcomes of this disability inclusion. Several other companies have followed suit and adopted the model, Sephora, Bed Bath & Beyond, and they've been documenting all of this. So there's not a ton of data, but there's good data about the positive benefits to disability inclusion. And they found that the tipping point is about 20%. So if you have a department, a working group, a company, and 20% or more of the individuals have self-identified as a person with disabilities, and you're providing accommodations, then you get a lot of positive benefits as far as the corporate culture. Sitting with the top management of the Walgreens distribution center, people had been in warehousing and distribution for 30, 35 years, just saying that the environment is incredible. Everyone in the organization is excited about what's happening there on an ongoing basis. A spirit of active mutual support, people looking out for one another, people spontaneously supporting the safety processes and procedures because they know following procedures is important to keep everyone safe. Hence the best safety record in their system. DuPont did a really great, one of the few longitudinal studies starting in the 1950s of tracking data around their employees with disabilities, and good, again, not a lot of data, but good solid data that the productivity of the disabled employees was as good or better than the non-disabled. Again, no greater safety incidents, better retention, lower turnover, lower absenteeism, all those things.
Yeah, well, I believe it was Accenture, wasn't it, who did a study And they actually were able to show that there's a 30% return on the bottom line for companies when they do hire disabled and have better diversity in the workplace.
Yeah, Accenture and the American Association of People with Disabilities, AAPD, and Disability In, which is an organization of companies with commitments to disability inclusion, have published that study that correlates disability inclusion to a lot of great bottom line results.
Mm-hmm. It's as a matter of fact, last week was our policy retreat here in Virginia for the State Rehabilitation Council, and I was speaking with one of our career social workers in Richmond, and he was talking about a great program. We talked about it before, but it's really getting larger. It's doing great. People with developmental disabilities being trained to do a very specific type of analysis for the military. And when they graduate from this training, they're sent out to work at various places,
Yeah.
Department of Defense, and it's so amazingly successful because they have a very unique ability to do this type of analysis.
Yeah.
So just taking people's strengths and putting them in where they're going to shine is really, kind of the heart of all of this.
Right. I'm a blind person. My retina is detached when I was in kindergarten, so I've been totally blind since childhood, and started first grade as a blind kid and learned Braille and cane travel and all those things. So I've got very good blindness skills. And one program I'm very proud of that I'm involved with is called the APEX program. And there is a webpage. It's just www.theapexprogram.com. And it's an initiative to prepare blind people for careers in cybersecurity.
That's great.
And it's just one of those things where everything kind of has come together to bring all the elements for great success into one place. Our country has a formal interest and commitment in cybersecurity. In July of 23, there was the National Cybersecurity Infrastructure, Workforce and Education Infrastructure Guidance was published, and an Office of National Cyber Directorate was established. And, there's 750,000 open cybersecurity jobs on any given day.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great demand and a lack of qualified, certified folks. So we've set up now in 20 states, including Virginia, relationships with those state-funded vocational rehabilitation agencies funded by the Department of Education. So, a person with a disability who's seeking employment, who is a client of their state VR agency, can have this training paid for by vocational rehabilitation. It's 200 hours of training, 10 weeks. Then the person sits for a Network Plus and a Security Plus certification exams, and then they have the entry-level qualifications to do entry-level cybersecurity analyst work. And once a person's in that industry, there are just so many career paths people can follow. So I'm very excited about that, among many other opportunities I'm seeing to create these win-win situations. There's a demand and there's a supply. So there's a demand for great employees. There's a supply of great employees looking for employment opportunities. And what I found is things are just quite siloed. If you look at the government vocational rehabilitation system, agencies in every state, $4 billion annual budget committed to creating employment opportunities and getting disabled people off of government support and into employment and from becoming taxpayers. And then you've got all these companies who say they can't find enough great people to hire. And many of them say they're committed to hiring people with disabilities. They can't find enough good people. And then you've got, in any community of any size, you've got nonprofits that are focused on employment of people with disabilities. Then you've got us disabled folks ourselves, our families, the various associations and organized groups around various disabilities. And all of them share the common goal of wanting to see better employment outcomes for people with disabilities. None of them are achieving the outcomes they want. So it's not rocket science, but I get the right people in the room. If
You
I
know,
have an employer in the state of California who wants to hire people with disabilities, I say, well, do you realize there's 8,000 blind people in this state with open cases with your
mhm.
state vocational rehabilitation agency, and each one has an individual plan for employment and a resume, and they're ready to work? And do you know there's a nonprofit in your town that focuses on helping people with disabilities become employed? And typically the answer is no. We weren't aware of that. So
Yeah.
I just invite the right people around the table, and we put together some win-win solutions.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that people don't know about these state rehabilitation programs. For me, it's the most important thing I do in the
Yeah,
day because, and living in the DC area, a town like this, to find something that's so bipartisan,
yeah.
helping disabled people become employed, making people
Who can be
taxes.
against it,
I
right?
mean, you just find me something negative about this. And I would, to my mind, busting this up in every single state because usually when I tell people, hey, did you know that we have a state rehabilitation department and you can apply for vocational rehabilitation and get back in the workforce? I rarely hear a no, I don't want to. I always hear, oh my goodness, I didn't know that existed.
Yeah,
I'm wanting to work again. I hate not being able to work.
right.
So that's the answer. Um, what great programs. I'm still learning something new every day. My goodness. I came into doing all of this after, as I became disabled myself, and I just learned a lot of things the hard way. And
Yeah.
now I am, learning by way of, the fire hose these days, new information. You've been doing this for years. One of the questions I had when I first came in, and people ask me the same question all the time, why are we funded Department of Education?
Yeah, well, the disability community fought for that. If we
Yeah.
could go back in time, I think, knowing what we know now, we would probably say we should be under the Department of Labor.
Mhm.
Um, it goes back, I think, to just quite frankly, ableism and the concepts of the ability for people with significant disabilities to actually work at the same level as a person without a disability. So, back in the 1930s and the New Deal, when the Social Security Administration was set up and Social Security disability insurance was set up, the assumption was if you have a disability, you can't work.
Right.
So you would apply, you would prove you have a disability, you'd get a monthly check. So
Mhm.
that still lives on today, and the fact that people with a disability can apply for and receive some level of support. But there's a sustainable, gainful limit. So you're only allowed to make a certain amount of money, and then you lose your check. So
Yep.
for us blind people were organized first and got to the table first. So our check is bigger. It's
Yeah.
$2,550. People with other disabilities is about $1,000 less. But if you earn one more dollar than your limit, then you lose your whole check, and you lose your Medicare and Medicaid benefits. So there's these
Yes.
built-in structural barriers to successful employment, and they really, like I say, go back to the concept of the 1930s, where the people who are making policy just thought, hey, if you have a disability, you can't work, and so we're going to set up this safety net.
Right.
And then when folks like Helen Keller, who was the brand ambassador for the American Foundation for the Blind, where I had the honor of previously being president and CEO, she went state by state to the legislatures and worked with them to set up what were called commissions for the blind. And this was in the late 30s and the 40s. And again, the assumptions were very limiting as far as the type of work that people envisioned people with disabilities could do. So it fell under training. Let's train people to do a little something. And somehow it was thought by the disability community that training aspect fit better with the Department of Education at that time.
Right.
So, of course, now the Department of Labor does lots of training, lots of apprenticeship programs, all kinds of things, and it would probably make more sense for voc rehab to be there, but it's not. Probably won't be. So we live with the systems that we have.
We do. You just try to improve them one little bit at a time as we go.
Yeah.
I had a
So I
conversation.
will say, when I was a blind kid, 1967, started first grade at the Oregon State School for the Blind. And at that school, they taught us how to weave baskets, which is a very stereotypical thing. So I have a beautiful basket that will be out on the table next week for Thanksgiving, holding our dinner rolls
Yeah.
that I made as a 7-year-old. And they taught people how to cane chairs. They taught the older kids how to tune pianos.
Oh, wow.
And that was basically the extent of the vocational thinking for us at that point in time, which was not that long ago.
Wow. Yeah, no, you're right. It's just amazing to think about how much has changed so quickly over the last, 50 years.
Yeah.
I've been speaking a lot with various people around the world who, are very much in a similar situation to myself. They became disabled much later in life. And
Yeah.
one thing that's very glaring to me is, our systems are very similar no matter where you go. I think often people think, oh, it must be better somewhere else. What are they doing? But we all largely follow the same format. And, we always wonder, why is Social Security disability not something there for temporary if you become disabled, to give you something to fall into and then bounce out of
Right.
when you're doing better, but have it there for when you're just in need of it, instead of it being this permanent thing that you have to hire an attorney to get, and you have to stay in
Yeah.
poverty for the rest of your life if that's what's going to happen. And I just think, we probably have grand ideas that would take at least 30, 40 years to fully change. But,
Right.
it is interesting looking at it from a different perspective. But, also 50 years ago, a woman like myself would not be in the workforce at all, much less have people talking about how do we keep her in the workforce and retain this talent instead of allowing that talent to
Yeah.
go.
And I 100 years ago, 110 years ago, blind people were in asylums for
Yeah.
the blind and living in work homes. And, some people were working in what were called sheltered workshops, where they were paid pennies to make things, that were sold, and it was charity. Just in the 60s, the hire the handicap campaign. It was hire a person because it's a charitable act. It's a good thing to do. Now it is hire a person with a disability because you want a really talented, unique person who can help drive your bottom line results. So it's a different conversation we're having now, which is
Yes.
great. Still a long, long, long way to go.
Oh,
Until the outcomes are the same. Until 70% of people with disabilities are in the workforce equivalent to everyone else. We
absolutely.
still have work to do.
That's the truth.
But it's better. It's better than it was. I will say it's interesting in that I think kind of disability inclusion, accessibility. Of course, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was our Civil Rights Act, passed in 1990. The curb cuts that everyone uses, the ramp that blends the sidewalk into the street, those really didn't exist until the early 70s.
Right.
When the disabled community, primarily wheelchair users, took civil action. They occupied the housing, education, welfare offices in San Francisco for a month. They, went to the DC and got out of their wheelchairs and dragged themselves up the steps of the Capitol until HEW Secretary Califanos, signed the guidance that curb cuts should be enforced. And now, less than 0.5% of those curb cuts you see in every city are used by people in wheelchairs. It's cyclists and skateboarders and parents with strollers and people with roller bags and grocery carts. And so, those kind of cultural shifts do happen. They take a long time.
Yeah.
I was
we've made so much progress over the last 50 years.
right.
It's almost, we have a lot to live up to each and every day because so much has been done over the last 50 years.
Yeah,
We
I
have
was at a conference in San Francisco some years ago, and we were in a big conference room, and we were talking about societal change. And the presenter just said something that just struck me, so strongly. He said, 40 years ago, we would have been sitting here, there would have been an ashtray on every table, and this room would be filled with smoke. And you get in your car and not put on a seatbelt and drive home.
Yeah,
So, things do change, but we
they do.
know our opportunity, Brandy, you and I and others, is to help accelerate this change
Absolutely.
by being aligned and working together.
And, and I think, and one thing I've noticed that happens frequently, especially in the United States, it's maybe a problem everywhere, but I do think it's a bit more pronounced here, having, lived and worked in many different countries. We tend to let a pendulum swing from one
Yeah,
far side to another, and we just can't find a way to stop and have a conversation right there before that pendulum keeps swinging. And I'm a little worried about the work from home efforts, and I'd love to hear your opinion. I know now everybody's returned to
yeah,
office. And I do, I am going to be the first person to say there is a lot lost when you're never face to face and working as a team. There's a lot that can happen there,
yeah.
but there's also a lot that can be done from home. And one of the greatest victories, if you will, of the pandemic was disabled people becoming more employed because of that
Right.
ability to work from home. And I'm a little worried that we may just set the pendulum and it'll swing to the other side. And the progress we've made with hiring disability might suffer. What do you think?
Well, I think you're probably right, and I think a lot of companies that own a lot of real estate and a lot of office buildings that are empty have
Yes.
decided, hey, we got to make people come back. But I think there's been a disruption.
Hmm.
This a silver lining to the pandemic was that disruption to how work processes happen. The need for flexibility, I think, has injected the ingredients for better flexibility into the world of work, which is good for people with disabilities.
Hmm.
It's all about the fit between the person and the work,
Yes.
and the more adaptable you are as a person, and the more adaptable the workplace is, the more chance you have for a better fit between the person and the workplace. So, you know, um, working from home, hybrid schedules, kind of breaking loose from the 9 to 5. People with certain disabling conditions, an accommodation can be a flexible work schedule. Like, hey, I can work 3 hours in the morning, and then I need 2 hours, and I can do 4 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Um, or for Monday through Thursday is better for me than Monday through Friday. Or work from home 2 days a week, come in 2 days. So,
Mhm.
the punch in at 9, punch out at 5, sit in your office is pretty disrupted. So that can only be good for us,
Yeah.
people with disabilities.
And I think, and what I try to point out to as many leaders as I possibly can, I think what we did was we proved how certain work can be done even better at home because many people were more productive at home than they were in
Right.
office. I mean, I love a good hybrid model. I'm one of those people who loves teamwork. I love getting a bunch of people in a room and us just,
Yeah.
diving into something. But there's also a lot to be said for just sitting at home, focusing in without interruption on your work and what needs to be done, and, kicking away that commute on either side of the day and just focusing in on the fine details. And I think that's what we really need to drive home that, hey, yeah, we need to do all that great collaboration, but let's not forget how much increase in productivity we saw from being done at home.
Yeah, and I do want to. This leads me to think about self-employment and entrepreneurship too, which I wanted to touch upon.
Oh, yeah.
So again, back to the fit between the person and the workplace, and a person with a disability. Um, you know, the creativity and how we create that fit with the workplace may look different.
Hmm.
But everyone needs that fit between themselves and the workplace. That's why we have family leave and PTO and
Hmm.
all the kind of standard things we have. But if you are self-employed, as I am now, and you are now, you have the opportunity to create a fit between yourself and your work
Hmm.
that really, really works for you.
Yes.
And like I said, only 35% of us are working. Only 6% of us are self-employed, and the
Wow.
majority of us work for nonprofits or government.
Hmm.
Of the general population, the 70% of people in the workforce, about 12% of people are self-employed. So only about half the percentage of us are self-employed. But
Hmm.
there's some really great research around disability and entrepreneurship, and kind
Hmm.
of what we were talking about before about strengths. In particular, living with disability allows people to develop the strengths that lead to success as entrepreneurs. And it's those
Right.
same things: the
Yes.
perseverance, the grit, the creativity, the flexibility, the adaptability, all the things entrepreneurs uh, need in order to succeed
No, you're
are things
absolutely
that
right.
people with disabilities have opportunities to develop. So I'll put a plug in for entrepreneurship for people with
You know
disabilities.
what? I'm really glad you did. And as a matter of fact, now that I'm thinking about it, are there many programs to help disabled persons to become entrepreneurs? I know I've seen quite a few courses at the SDA, but I do almost everything through ends up being a disabled veteran. So,
Yeah.
um,
Not as many as I would hope. Now, self-employment is a legitimate employment outcome for a client of vocational rehabilitation. So
yes.
you can become a client of your state VR agency and say your goal is to start a business or to become an entrepreneur, and that's a totally legit subject for individual plan for employment, your IPE. I don't know that VR is particularly well equipped to support that. The Chicago Lighthouse for the Blind has a program um,
Mm.
called the Fourth Scythe, FORSYTH Institute, and it's in particular to prepare blind people to be entrepreneurs. And after you finish their coursework, you've earned credit toward an academic certificate in entrepreneurship through Miami of Ohio
Oh,
University.
great. Yeah.
So that's one I'm aware of. Um, but my short answer is that I'm not aware of many.
Yeah. The only ones that I know of are, things I've done again through the lens of being a disabled veteran rather than
Uh-huh.
just a disabled American. I think um, that'd be a great thing to really look into. Small business administration. Where are you?
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, because we are very well equipped to be entrepreneurs. I immediately became successful, but it was because of my ability to be so resilient and reactive and change and,
Uh-huh.
you know, do what it takes to make something happen.
I also want to talk about visible and invisible disabilities. So I have a visible disability. When I walk in with my long white cane and my braille note taker, it's pretty obvious I'm a blind person. But 70% of us with significant disabilities, they're non-apparent.
Right?
Um, so that's a whole kind of different ball game in some ways, and it requires a degree of self-advocacy. I think that's above and beyond what it requires for someone like myself.
Yes.
So, when I got out of college with, Phi Beta Kappa and cum laude and wanted to go to work and was applying for jobs, I had an econ degree. And, I'd send out my cover letter and resume and get a phone interview and then get called in for the in-person and walk in, like I said, with my cane and at that time my braille slate and stylus and some paper so I could take notes in braille. The person interviewing me had probably never encountered a blind professional before. I had
Hmm.
no way to conceptualize how I would do the job I was applying for. So then I started putting it in my cover letter, just saying, I've been totally blind since I was 5 years old. This is how I've done what I've done. This is how I'll do the job. And then I wasn't even getting phone interviews.
Yeah.
So that there's a point in time, if you have a visible disability, where do you choose to disclose your disability? Now, if your visibility is non-apparent, you may never have to disclose, but I am a big advocate for sharing that information with the employer. There's a lot of fear
So
around that. Will there be
there is,
negative
but
consequences?
I do agree with you.
I will say that if you have, well, first of all, demographics would show that in any workplace of any size, about 15% of people have a disability. So, there could be some wheelchair people, some deaf people, some blind people, but there's probably a lot of people with anxiety, depression, ADHD,
Yes.
PTSD, all the things. So when companies report out, kind of the percentages of people with disabilities they have in their workforce, they usually report like 1.5% to 4%. But we know there's probably 15%. So there's a lot of people who could be a better employee, a happier person, more productive, a better contributor if they were receiving the support and accommodations they're entitled to as a person with a disability. So I say, if you work with a company that's large enough to have a disability related employee resource group, join that, attend those meetings. You don't have to disclose you have a disability necessarily at that point. If you have whom you consider a competent HR professional who can maintain confidentiality, you may want to talk with them. But it's not only good for you, because you can say, I have anxiety, I am treating it with medication and talk therapy. I need an hour every afternoon to tend to my personal mental health needs, so I need a flexible schedule. Even if you're low vision and you could use a larger monitor, hey, I could be a better employee if I had a larger monitor.
Yes.
It can be very simple. I could I have a condition where I can't really sit. I need a standing desk. So sharing, self-disclosure is kind of a scary sounding term. So I'm trying to come up with a better one, Brandy. So
Well,
for now, I'll use sharing. If you share your situation, it's not only good for you because you can have a better fit between yourself and your workplace, but it's better for everyone else with a disability because you're setting an example. You're teaching your organization how to be flexible and how to provide accommodations.
I like to call it being a disability leader.
Yeah.
Because, and I strongly support talking about it, telling your HR, letting your team know. I know that there's a lot of fear around it, and yes, you can't legally be discriminated against, but it does still happen in the workforce all the time.
Sure.
But what I never got the chance to see when I was first diagnosed with Crohn's disease is I never saw somebody else like me in the workforce. And I just did not know what it was going to look like. All I knew was I could not leave my house in the mornings. I knew that I was having tons of doctor's appointments and hospitalizations and all sorts of terrible stuff. And there was no example for me on what to do. I didn't even know. So now I better understand that it's important because doctors, they're not the best at, helping you do vocational rehab.
No.
In fact, almost every doctor I've ever had has said, well, why don't you just apply for disability? And that's never been what I wanted. I don't want disability.
Right.
I want to work. So I needed that somebody to be the example. So now I'm a very big proponent of being the example, talking to HR, talking to your team members. I want people to know I have Crohn's disease. I'm not, a big fan of the Crohn's disease, but
Sure.
I think people need to know what you're going through. Because a good friend of mine who is an executive at Exxon, she said to me one day, everybody has something. And for
Yeah.
you have Crohn's disease and a neurologic disorder. For other people, they might go through cancer. Somebody else has a kid with an illness or disability. Somebody else is dealing with anxiety or was recently in a car accident is trying to
Right.
learn how to walk with a prosthetic
Hey,
leg
so
or
some people are shorter than average. Some people are taller than average. So
exactly. Like, we're not alone. We're not just like, oh, I can't tell anybody because I'm the worst. They'll never think, no, we all have something. We all have to go to the boss at one point and say, you know what? I'm going to need some help here because I have, and then state your problem. So I just think it's very important to be that leader and be that disability leader and stand
yeah.
up and say, I have a disability and I need accommodations and let people see what it looks like because we do, and disproportionately, we do lose WIP, but we do lose
hmm
a lot of people out of the workforce because they just don't know what it looks like to continue working with Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis,
Yeah.
you name it.
I think there's a great opportunity with technology to find community around those things and
Mhm.
find other people. If you're listening to this, if you're a joiner, I mean, there's an association for everything. On the blindness side, there's National Federation of the Blind, American Council of the Blind. They have state and local chapters. There's an association for anything and everything. And I think you could find other people who've traveled the path before you who will be happy to share their experiences and their wisdom with you, whether that's formally joining an organization or just finding a social media group, finding someone who's in your community who has some similar situations to you. So I think there's a great opportunity to form community
Mhm.
that we haven't had until very recent years with technology.
Yes, and it's going to keep getting better. I think, with people like you out there and, so many great organizations working so hard to be more inclusive of disabled persons. And the more we talk about it, the more we work hard, the better it's going to become. Well, thank you so, so much for coming on. I'd love to have you back on again. I know Stacey, everybody's talking about what will the new administration bring. So we'll have to keep our eyes and ears
Yeah,
so good, and I'll double on the eyes if you can double on the ears for me,
yeah.
and see what's coming down the pike for new policy and legislation related to disabled Americans, and see how we can't make that a better world.
I'd love to do it. I am launching a podcast as well. Would love to have
Hey,
you
tell me
be
about it.
my guest and hear. I can ask you questions about your experience. So that'll be a
Yeah,
wonderful thing to do.
no, that sounds great. And what's the name of your new podcast?
It is simply called Podcasts by Dr. Kirk Adams.
Get to the point. I like something that gets to the
I,
point.
I had a fancy, clever name, and the person I'm working with said they'll never find you. Just call it your name. I said okay.
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 Yeah, no
So,
better way to brand than, you've been Dr. Kirk Adams for a very long time.
that's
So
right. Yep.
why change now? Well,
Yeah, and
thank
that's
you.
my website too, which I just launched, drkirkadams.com if anyone
I'll
wants to find me.
sure to put that
drkirkadams.com.
in the notes as well.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so
Great
much.
speaking with you. Have a wonderful week.
You too.
All right.